Imagine waking up to a headline that sounds like a plot twist in a war movie. Iranian military sources claim they launched anti-ship cruise missiles at the USS Abraham Lincoln and that the carrier strike group was forced to reposition. Not a warning shot, not a vague threat, a claim of direct engagement with one of America's most protected symbols of power. Now pause, because the most important part isn't whether the missiles reached their target, it's why Tehran wants the world to believe they did. Governments don't make statements like this to inform you. They make them to move you, your emotions, your expectations, your sense of what's possible. If this happened as stated, it's escalation. If it didn't, it's still escalation, just through information instead of kinetic action. Either way, according to defense analysts, a new threshold may have been tested in these waters. And when carriers start repositioning, every ally listens, every rival tests, and every miscalculation becomes larger than anyone intended. In a moment, we'll break down the one detail that decides whether this is strategic messaging or the first step towards something far harder to stop. So let's separate what's being claimed from what's been independently verified. On the 25th, Iran's state broadcaster aired a statement from Iranian military sources claiming that several Gader anti-ship cruise missiles were launched toward the USS Abraham Lincoln and that the carrier was forced to adjust its position. The Gader, according to Iranian defense reports, is a domestically adapted missile derived from earlier designs with a stated reach of approximately 300 kilometers, close enough to matter in the constrained geometry of the Gulf. But notice the language. Claimed, stated, according to Iranian sources. At the time of this reporting, that is exactly what it remains, an assertion, not a confirmed engagement report from independent observers, not a publicly released damage assessment, not even the kind of definitive imagery that usually accompanies such narratives. Then come the supporting voices. Shahram Irani, the Iranian Navy's commander, warns they are monitoring the carrier group continuously and that any hostile fleet inside missile range will face a powerful response. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Iran's parliamentary speaker, someone U.S. media has identified as a potential diplomatic contact posts that Washington should not test Iran's resolve. This is how information strategy operates. You don't need to disable the ship. You need to shift the perception. Because once perception shifts, commanders make quieter adjustments, routes altered, patrols increased, allies reassured, adversaries emboldened. And those adjustments, made under uncertainty, can push all parties closer to unintended outcomes. Now here's where the strategic picture becomes critical. Now zoom out and do the thing most analysis never does. Draw a circle, not a metaphorical one, an actual 300-kilometer radius centered along Iran's coastline and its scattered island positions. That single number, the reported reach of the Gader system, creates an engagement envelope that transforms the Persian Gulf from an open operational area into a constrained tactical space. Look at the geography. The Strait of Hormuz is a choke point where shipping lanes compress, where maneuver space contracts, where there are fewer safe directions to operate. A carrier strike group is designed to project power across oceans, to launch aircraft, to command vast areas. But in confined waters, according to naval warfare experts, the ocean stops behaving like an ocean. It behaves like terrain. Distance becomes defensive buffer. Proximity becomes tactical exposure. And this is the part that challenges conventional thinking. People hear aircraft carrier and imagine invulnerability, like a floating fortress that can simply absorb risk. Yet modern anti-ship warfare doctrine isn't only about a missile's payload. It's about forcing the most valuable platform to operate farther away, with fewer options under greater operational constraints. While regional actors observe, so when Iranian sources claim the Lincoln repositioned, the question isn't just did a missile launch occur. The deeper question military analysts are asking is, did the operational geometry shift? Because if commanders assess they've been located, tracked, and brought inside that 300-kilometer envelope, even briefly, standard doctrine suggests widening the standoff distance. In narrow seas, distance equals defense. That's why this geographic dimension matters strategically. It's the difference between a headline that creates temporary concern and a tactical constraint that influences decision-making for months. And once a carrier begins operating under different threat assumptions, every regional actor processes that information. When a carrier repositions, casual observers imagine it's just naval routine, another position update on a map. But in deterrence dynamics, movement is communication, sometimes louder than official statements. A carrier strike group doesn't reposition without reason. Positions because someone, somewhere, has altered the risk calculation. In modern crises, the side that influences behavior doesn't always engage first. It only needs to create hesitation. According to military analysts, there are three distinct scenarios hiding behind the same claim. The first is an actual engagement. A missile is launched toward the target. contact occurs and the strategic landscape fundamentally changes. The second is a near engagement or tracking event. Something is detected, maybe a radar lock is assessed, maybe a launch is interpreted, and the decision is made to increase the buffer zone. No contact, but a message is transmitted, we can reach your operating area. The third is pure information warfare, a public claim engineered to make U.S. forces respond as if the first or second occurred, because the response itself becomes the evidence. This is why Tehran's phrasing carries weight. Forced to reposition attempts to turn American defensive protocol into Iranian validation. Even if no contact occurred, if the carrier maintains greater standoff distance, if sortie patterns adjust, if escort formations tighten, if flight operations shift, then Iranian sources can point and state our capabilities influence their deployment. So don't focus exclusively on the dramatic image of battle damage, watch the response pattern. Quiet repositioning, heightened alert postures, accelerated asset arrivals. Those are the real indicators. And in subsequent deployments, the answer tends to emerge before anyone publicly acknowledges the underlying question. To understand why Iranian sources keep referencing the Gader, you have to stop thinking of a single missile as a standalone capability. Think of it as one element in a layered system. The Gader is described as an anti-ship cruise missile, Iran's iteration on previous designs, built to operate at low altitude, follow program trajectories, and threaten vessels inside a reported range of roughly 300 kilometers. On paper, that's a specification. In practice, according to defense assessments, it's a boundary line, a distance at which commanders begin asking different operational questions. But Iranian strategy has never relied on one perfect weapon. According to regional security analysts, it's the way they layer capabilities. Coastal defense systems that can be relocated and concealed, fast attack craft that can swarm and complicate targeting, unmanned systems that extend surveillance and create uncertainty. And most importantly, an intelligence and targeting network, what militaries call ISR, that attempts to answer the only question that matters in anti-ship operations: where is the target currently positioned? Because once you can credibly threaten the where, you influence the how. A carrier doesn't need to be disabled to be operationally constrained. It just needs to be compelled to operate farther out, to expend more time and resources, to launch aircraft from less optimal distances, to maintain tighter escort formations, to reduce operational flexibility. Every mile of additional standoff distance becomes a cost. Every layer of increased caution becomes friction. This is anti-access strategy in practical terms. Not victory through a single decisive engagement, but influence through geometry and uncertainty, transforming the operational environment into a space where even the most capable Navy must move more deliberately, signal more clearly, and assume it's under observation. And that's why the Gader claim matters strategically, even without confirmed battle damage. It's conditioning for a new operational baseline where the mere assessed possibility of a launch becomes sufficient to influence American position. Defense analysts suggest this isn't about disabling a carrier, it's about reshaping the operational calculus, one defensive adjustment at a time. And this is where the narrative stops being about one claim and starts being about movement, because militaries communicate through logistics long before they communicate through press releases. While Iranian statements were circulating through news cycles, defense reports pointed to U.S. positioning in ways that appear deliberately early, deliberately visible. Not just another escort vessel deploying, but the kind of assets you position when you want options that can't be generated at the last minute. According to military sources, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit is reportedly moving via the amphibious assault ship USS Tripoli and the landing ship USS New Orleans. At the same time, the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit reportedly embarked the amphibious assault ship USS Boxer, heading toward the Middle East 3 weeks ahead of standard schedule. That timing carries significance. Military planners don't accelerate deployments for media narratives. They accelerate when decision makers want operational pieces positioned before someone else decides to change the board. NMEU is not a symbolic force, it's a self-contained operational package. Personnel, aircraft, logistics, the kind of capability set that can conduct evacuations, reinforce diplomatic facilities, respond to sudden contingencies, or maintain offshore presence as a signal you don't need to articulate. It's flexible power, the opposite of a single rigid commitment. So when you see these vessels and units identified, don't treat it like background detail. Designations are indicators. Tripoli, New Orleans, Boxer. These aren't just hulls, they're platforms for decision-making. They allow Washington to signal, without stating explicitly, we can protect our interests, we can respond rapidly, and we can do it without requesting permission. But here's what most observers miss. This kind of deployment acceleration is also a form of risk management. According to defense planning doctrine, it's what you do when you assess the operational environment as becoming less predictable, when the margin for error is contracting, and when you want to deter the next escalation, not punish the previous one. In scenarios like this, early deployments are the quiet acknowledgement that all parties are preparing for contingencies. In a situation like this, according to conflict analysts, both sides are attempting something that sounds simple and is operationally complex. Demonstrate capability without forcing direct engagement. Iranian leadership seeks to show it can reach high-value American assets, carriers, amphibious vessels, the symbols that communicate regional presence. But it also seeks to stop short of the kind of undeniable contact that would unify Washington, lock in retaliation, and transform a managed rivalry into an uncontrollable escalation. That's the balance. Demonstrate reach, avoid the threshold. On the other hand, the United States cannot afford to appear as if it's being operationally constrained. The moment a carrier is perceived as repositioned under pressure, every regional actor observing learns a dangerous lesson. Pressure produces results. And if pressure works once, strategic logic suggests it will be repeated. Louder, closer, and more aggressive, until something finally misfires. This is what deterrence thresholds look like in practice. They're not clearly marked. They're assessed. Iranian decision makers assess what Washington will tolerate. Washington assesses what Tehran will risk. And in the gap between those assessments sits miscalculation. A radar contact misinterpreted, a weapons test read as an attack, an unmanned system that crosses an invisible boundary at the wrong moment. Then comes the psychology of credibility. Leaders don't only manage strategy, they manage audiences. Iranian officials must appear resolute domestically. American commanders must protect credibility with allies and constituencies who expect strength, not restraint disguised as caution. Even a defensive repositioning can be portrayed by the opposing side as weakness, and that narrative can corner decision makers into escalation just to reclaim the perception. So the real risk is mutual. Iranian forces apply pressure to gain operational space. American forces harden posture to deny the precedent. Both claim they are preventing conflict, yet each move, each statement, each deployment tightens the system until a misread can trigger consequences. And once that happens, according to crisis escalation models, the next decisions won't be made in daylight briefings, but in minutes, under stress, with incomplete information. If you're trying to process a crisis like this effectively, you need a framework to distinguish signal from noise. According to defense analysts, there are 3 scenarios that could explain Iranian claims, and each one leads to a very different operational trajectory. First, it's pure information strategy. No missile engagement occurred, perhaps no launch happened. The objective was deterrence through narrative. Iranian sources communicate to their domestic audience, their proxy networks, and their diplomatic channels. We can reach the crown jewel. The risk is credibility erosion. If the claim is clearly contradicted, Tehran appears weaker, not stronger. In that case, Washington's likely response is to maintain operational posture, issue carefully calibrated denials, and quietly strengthen defenses without providing Iran the strategic validation of dramatic overreaction. Second, it's a probe, something close enough to register operationally but calibrated to avoid definitive evidence. That could mean testing tracking systems, applying electronic pressure, or staging a near engagement that compels commanders to treat it seriously. In forces gain intelligence and observe how quickly U.S. assets respond. The risk is accidental escalation. A probe can be misread as an attack, or it can intersect with heightened alert protocols on either side. Here, defense analysts suggest the U.S. response tends to be more pronounced. Additional escorts, expanded surveillance, clearer warnings, and more assets forward deployed, all designed to raise the cost of repeat attempts. Third, it's an actual strike attempt, a launch directed toward the carrier group, regardless of whether contact was achieved. Iranian sources gain maximum psychological impact because it demonstrates intent, not just capability, but it also assumes maximum risk, because now Washington must consider credibility, alliance reassurance, and the precedent of allowing a high-value asset to be targeted. According to military doctrine, the likely U.S. response is a combination of public messaging and operational action, tightening rules of engagement, increasing readiness postures, and signaling that the next incident will not be treated as a headline, but as a hostile act with consequences. Which scenario fits the available evidence? The answer usually isn't found in official statements. It's in the subtle indicators that follow, and those indicators are what strategic observers track next. Because in crises, according to intelligence analysis principles, the truth emerges through behavior. Maritime advisories, diplomatic tone shifts, emergency deployments, and the notable silences where officials decline to answer direct questions. When governments prefer not to confirm a narrative, they rarely issue outright denials. They do something more calculated. They allow reality to speak through indirect channels. If you want to assess whether this claim forced, genuine operational adjustments, you don't start with dramatic imagery. You start with the routine indicators that influence commercial activity, routes, and risk assessments. Watch maritime advisories and the language of caution. If commercial traffic begins to reroute, reduce speed, or favor different transit lanes, it may suggest the threat assessment has shifted. Watch insurance markets as well. When underwriters sense elevated risk, even without public confirmation, premiums can increase, and that's often one of the earliest indirect confirmations in any maritime crisis. Listen for shifts in air patrol messaging. You may observe more references to heightened readiness, increased patrols, or force protection, phrased carefully to avoid acknowledging specific triggers. Pay attention to what isn't stated. Strategic silence can be more revealing than denial, especially when officials maintain narrow, scripted responses and deflect basic follow-up questions. According to military doctrine, the likely U.S. response is a combination of public messaging and operational action, tightening rules of engagement, increasing readiness postures, and signaling that the next incident will not be treated as a headline, but as a hostile act with consequences. Which scenario fits the available evidence? The answer usually isn't found in official statements. It's in the subtle indicators that follow, and those indicators are what strategic observers track next. Because in crises, according to intelligence analysis principles, the truth emerges through behavior. Maritime advisories, diplomatic tone shifts, emergency deployments, and the notable silences where officials decline to answer direct questions. When governments prefer not to confirm a narrative, they rarely issue outright denials. They do something more calculated. They allow reality to speak through indirect channels. If you want to assess whether this claim forced genuine operational adjustments, you don't start with dramatic imagery. You start with the routine indicators that influence commercial activity, routes, and risk assessments. Watch maritime advisories and the language of caution. If commercial traffic begins to reroute, reduce speed, or favor different transit lanes, it may suggest the threat assessment has shifted. Watch insurance markets as well. When underwriters sense elevated risk, even without public confirmation, premiums can increase, and that's often one of the earliest indirect confirmations in any maritime crisis. Listen for shifts in air patrol messaging. You may observe more references to heightened readiness, increased patrols, or force protection, phrased carefully to avoid acknowledging specific triggers. Pay attention to what isn't stated. Strategic silence can be more revealing than denial, especially when officials maintain narrow, scripted responses and deflect basic follow-up questions. According to geopolitical analysts, it's a strategic lever. To claim you can reach the carrier is to claim you can influence America's credibility, the assurance that U.S. power can maintain offshore presence and shape regional outcomes. Even if no contact occurred, the claim itself pressures partner nations. Do you still rely on the security umbrella if the umbrella must maintain greater standoff distance? This is also where diplomatic positioning and public messaging converge into one instrument. Mohammed Bagher Ghalibaf has been identified in some U.S. media as a potential diplomatic interlocutor, a figure who might appear in future negotiations, and yet he issues public warnings reminding Washington not to test Iran's resolve. That is in contradiction. According to negotiation theory, it's bargaining posture. The stronger your perceived position outside the room, the better your leverage inside it. Deterrence is leverage, and leverage is diplomatic currency. Domestic political considerations matter as well. Leaders who can point to a defiant narrative, our capabilities influenced carrier positioning, buy themselves political time, internal unity, and permission to maintain harder negotiating positions. And on the American side, the same narrative creates pressure on decision makers to demonstrate they are not being strategically manipulated. So no, according to regional security experts, this isn't about one vessel on one day. It's about shaping the decision-making environment in which the next choice is made by diplomats, by commanders, by publics who will demand accountability if something escalates. Because if this claim becomes a pattern, the entire naval operational picture of the Middle East shifts, quietly at first, and then suddenly for all parties. Here's the strategic principle modern conflicts reveal. You don't have to disable the strongest asset on the board to make it operate differently. You only have to convince stakeholders it can be reached. A single claim, missiles launched, carrier repositioned, can contract the operational space a Navy perceives as secure, the way perception can alter behavior without physical contact. If Iranian strategy convinces commanders, allies, and markets that a carrier must maintain greater standoff distance, it achieves operational space. More freedom of movement for its vessels, more latitude for proxy forces to posture, more room for diplomatic processes to proceed under a new assumption American naval power must account for greater cost just to maintain presence. No battle damage required, just a new baseline of operational caution. But perception is a strategic instrument that doesn't self-regulate. Once the region begins operating inside that narrative, every radar contact carries more weight, every unmanned system appears more significant, every routine maneuver looks potentially adversarial. And when both sides fear being perceived as strategically yielding, according to conflict escalation studies, they become more likely to interpret ambiguity as aggression. That's how misreads become launches, and launches become cascades no party can reverse. Underneath the strategic theater are operational personnel, sailors, port workers, coastal populations, whose security environment tightens as leaders protect credibility as much as strategic interests. That's the sobering callback to the opening. Whether a Gader actually launched or not, the claim has already generated strategic effects. It's attempting to construct an invisible operational boundary on the water, a constraint built from expectations where every subsequent move carries greater cost than the previous one. And once it forms, according to naval warfare experts, no commander operates without accounting for it. So here is where I leave you with a question that matters more than daily headlines. According to the available evidence and strategic indicators, was this an information operation designed to shift regional perception, a calibrated probe to test American response protocols, or something closer to an actual strike attempt that may never be fully confirmed? Drop your analysis in the comments below and tell me which scenario you believe best fits the observable patterns we are currently tracking. I will be monitoring the indicators we discussed as they develop over the coming days, and if the strategic picture shifts, you will see the analysis here. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next assessment as events unfold, and join us as we track these developments together.